Greetings everyone, DonTheCrown here. Just giving you a little update for my starter build, the Cyclone Champion. We ended up going Champion as opposed to Berserker because this league is incredibly rippy and having Champion's additional defensive layers are really amazing. Before we get started though, let's show you a little gameplay. We're going to do a tier 16 tower here. And yeah, away we go. So I started off the league and I was using a Terminus Est from probably around like level 53 or so, I believe. And as soon as I got to level 51-ish or so, that's when I could have equipped Terminus Est, but I didn't use it right away because I didn't have one. But as soon as I did, I switched over to Cyclone, and it was just really smooth from that point on. I had no problem leveling, no problem getting into my first few maps, and just overall, I had a good time. I believe, started off going into maps with a 4 or a 5 link, so that was a little bit of a downside. But I went out and got Celestial Justicar cards, and Celestial Justicar is a divination card set that, when turned in, gives you a 6-linked Astral Plate. Now, something to note is that this Astral Plate will have an item level equal to, but limited to 80. And so it's equal to your character level, but limited to item level 80. So if you're going to hand this in on your first character, you want to make sure that you are actually level 80 or higher. Otherwise, you won't get a maximum item level chest that you could get. So I actually had to wait, I think about 3 to 4 levels until I was high enough to, hand that card in. And once I did, I was able to color that up. I threw a few of these essences like this at the chest. A lot of these will give you either life or it'll give you, resistances. And I believe I threw essences like this, Essence of Hatred, on my chest, and we landed something really, really nice. But we'll talk about gear in a little bit. Overall, the builds performed incredibly well. We gone all the way to tier 16s with very little gear. Only major piece that we purchased was a Rislothus coil for about 3.5 exalts, but besides that, for the most part, I'd say most of my gear is pretty budget and or self-found. I got pretty lucky. My partner had found a hat that had Blood Rage and Attack Speed enchant, and I had been looking for a hat, and we just self-crafted one up. Honestly, the rolls on my hat aren't really amazing, but this enchant is pretty decent. I'd say Blood Rage Attack Speed is probably the best all-around enchant, especially if you're looking to, like, later on in the league, move away from using Cyclone. But using Cyclone damage is also totally fine. But yeah, the other minor change that I made from the starter build is that we are going to use First to Strike, Last to Fall now as our last Ascendancy point. And what First to Strike, Last to Fall does is it makes it so that enemies you hit are permanently intimidated, and you gain adrenaline for 20 seconds when you reach low life. And you also recover 25% of your life when you gain adrenaline, and all ailments and burning are removed when you gain adrenaline. This is, to me, a little bit better than Unstoppable Hero, where you're getting 10% increased attack speed, 1,000 armor, and a little bit of attack damage and can't be stunned. You can't be stunned while you're cycloning anyways. 1,000 armor doesn't really do much. Like, it's kind of nice, but that's not really a lot of damage mitigation at all. And the attack speed's good, the attack damage is good, but overall, adrenaline is amazing. What adrenaline does is it makes it so that you have 100% increased attack damage, 25% attack cast and movement speed, and 10% additional physical damage reduction. And that's just really fast. And you can actually proc this on bosses automatically by, in a weapon swap, having a blood magic support linked to a summon skitterbots. What this does is it reserves 68% of your mana, or your life in this case, and that'll bring us down to 32% HP, which will proc off adrenaline, as you'll see right here. I have the adrenaline buff, and then I hit my flask, and it will heal up before the boss kind of comes out. Then I just activate flasks, spin, and win. And I do this on every Cirrus phase as well, because with the Pantheon power for Rislatha, I get more life flasks as we're waiting for him to come down. So you're pretty much able to do this all the time, and it's really, really great. It's also extremely nice for just the league mechanic in general, because you're able to get adrenaline pretty frequently, because you'll be getting hit very, very hard this league. It is a extremely rippy league. It hits incredibly hard, and if you've been playing, I'm sure I don't need to tell you that. But let's go over a little bit of the gear and passives. Let's start off actually with the passive. The Ascendancy hasn't really changed all that much. We're going with Master of Metal first. This is going to be really, really nice for leveling. Master Metal gives you 20% chance to impale. Your impales last 2 additional hits, and if you've impaled an enemy recently, you get 1,000 flat armor, and you gain 6 to 12 added physical damage for each impale. So all of that adds up to a lot of damage, some free impale chance, and free armor. That's really, really, really nice for leveling. And actually, as soon as I got Master of Metal, I put on Impale Support, I put on Dread Banner, and I had Swift Skewering, so I was at 100% chance to impale very early on in my leveling process, and very noticeable in my damage and clearing. Besides that, I'll have a POB that has a lot of the different like build progression in terms of just like going through the tree, but I kind of filled out the entire tree without the cluster jewel that you see here. I went all the way over to Fatal Blade last, and this was kind of what my tree looked like. Now, we had one little life and mana leech node here for a little bit of time until we fixed my mana cost on Cyclone with gear. But once I got to this point on my tree, I started looking into cluster jewels. Now, honestly, my large cluster jewel, not really all that great, far from perfect. The top tier mods for cluster jewels for this particular build, if you're dual wielding, I would say that the Blood Scent is up there along with Deep Cuts. What Blood Scent does is attacks or hits with swords. Attacks with axes or swords grant 1 rage on hit, but no more than once every second. And I'd say that for mapping, this feels really good, especially if you take more than a minute to do a map, because you're gonna be a full rage. And this is giving me about 17.4% more damage over just in general, having rage at 50%, and that's like about 8% at half rage. So that is very strong. The other really good node is Deep Cuts. I don't have an example of this because I just haven't bothered. But Deep Cuts does, the notable thing is it adds basically 1 more impale stack. It makes all your impales last for 1 more hit. And so you're going to be going from 7 impales to 8 impales. And that is giving you about 8.4% more damage. Some other notables that are kind of good, I think, like Deadly Repartee is pretty decent, and Fuel the Fight. And if you don't have a 0 mana cost skill, Feed the Fury is really, really nice as well. But for the most part, the most important thing on your large cluster jewel is that A, it is higher item level than 75, and that it has at least 2 jewel sockets, because it's really the medium jewels that really carry the damage. Also, you want your large to be as small as possible. So you want your large cluster jewel to have 8 passive skills, and that being the max. I have a video that talks about how to search for these. You can check my YouTube playlist, or maybe I'll put an annotation over there. But let's talk about medium cluster jewels. So both my medium cluster jewels are basically exactly the same, and we're using Precise Focus, Rapid Infusion, and a jewel socket. Now, what Precise Focus does, and yes, you can have multiple of these. These are just like having Legion jewel clusters, where you have 5 attack speed nodes in your tree. These all stack because they're not keystones. So between having 2 of these, I get 100% increased critical strike chance while channeling. And then I also am getting 60% critical strike multiplier if I've been channeling for at least 1 second. Now you can see this if we look at my default attack here. You can see my crit multi is 393. And if I spin, it goes up to 453. However, you notice that the second I stop spinning, that goes away, right? So this is not very good for skills like Blade Flurry. And I'd say it's probably only good at all for Cyclone, maybe Charge Dash. Now, next up, we also have Rapid Infusion. What Rapid Infusion does, it gives you 50% increased effective infusion and 5% increased movement speed while you have infusion. So this turns into 100% increased effective infusion and 10% movement speed. And when they're talking about infusion, they're talking about infused channeling. Now, infused channeling can be a little bit confusing, but basically you gain infusion after channeling a supported skill for a set period of time. At 2020, it's 0.6 seconds. This gives it more damage, but then it gives you infusion. Now, infusion grants 10% more damage of types matching the supported skills gem tags. Now, what that means is physical, fire, cold, lightning, or chaos. So that's basically 20% more damage for physical in our particular case. Now, this doesn't count for like AoE or projectile or any other tag. It's just the physical tag in this particular case. Now, you also see that while channeling a supported skill, take 8% less damage from hits of the types matching. That's not infusion, so that doesn't get amplified at all either. But still, this basically means that this is 5% more damage and 5% movement speed. Unfortunately, POB does not support rapid infusion yet, so if you're looking at my POB, I probably edited it in there to make it work. Next up, for the small cluster jewels, I highly recommend getting Fettle, which is extremely rare. This gives you 20 flat life and 10% life. That is just really, really nice. And then I have it so that my miners are giving me life, strength, all res. These are all good things. Basically, what you want to do is roll these jewels around. You want these to be as high as item level as possible. You keep rolling these until you get probably Fettle or another node that you really care about. And then hopefully you get some additional added small passive skill things that matter. We slammed the evasion on there with a Leo bench. Kind of unfortunate. And oh yeah, for the medium cluster jewels, the item level doesn't matter at all. Actually, the lower the item level, the better. You want these to be a 4 passive skill cluster. And because you want it to be as small as possible, so you're getting as much damage per point spent. And this one over here, I believe I have Fettle as well, a little bit Chaos Res, and a little bit of Regen. And that's pretty much it for my cluster jewels. I've looked into chopping off like this part of the tree over here to get another cluster jewel here, and right now it's just not worth the points. Maybe if I was level 100, it'd be worth it. But I think the ideal perfect large cluster jewel would probably be Blood Scent, and then Deep Cuts, and then maybe either Devastator for the explosions, or it's kind of hard to say. I think honestly this is the best setup because you're kind of like saving 2 points from not having to travel there. Now you might wonder, Don, what are these like lonely dexterity points here doing? What's going on with that? Well, unfortunately, I don't have a ton of dexterity to equip my Paradoxicas just because of my particular setup. And so if I had like taken these points out, I basically am no longer able to equip them. And yeah, that's kind of bad. You can fix this in other ways with like maybe having better Circle of Guilt or something, or better gear. But we're just kind of making it work for right now. I was making it work with Headhunter before. Now, talking about gear, as you notice, I'm no longer using my two-hander Terminus Est. I've switched to using Paradoxicas. Paradoxica is an insane weapon that probably should get nerfed. Don't tell GGG anybody, nobody snitch. This gives us basically permanent double damage at the cost of not being able to benefit from double damage from other sources. And also, you only get 2 other lines on there. So this one, for example, I unveiled both of mine. And this has the percent physical with bleed, and then also has attack speed quality. This is pretty close to one of the best you can get. I think percent physical and attack speed quality is the best combination, with percent physical and then attack speed something else, probably being tier 2, and then tier 3 probably being crit strike quality, and then crit strike with something else after that. As you can see, my other sword, not so great. I managed to get a physical damage mod, a lower tier one, but then damage per power charge. So this is pretty bad, and if I was going to keep investing more money into this build, I would definitely look to replace this sword. I think that if you're unveiling them for yourself, I'm not 100% sure how the crafting of that works. I do believe there's maybe a chance that you might need to have the craft unlocked on your bench already before you would be able to actually get the top tier craft, but I'm not 100% positive about that because I haven't messed around with them a lot, and I generally have all the crafts anyways, so it's kind of hard to say. The other weapon that I'm using in my weapon swap is Sinvicta's Metal. As you notice, this has on the very bottom line Rampage. What Rampage does is allows you to pretty much have a kill counter going. So as you kill things, you get buffs, you go faster, you do more damage, and it's generally pretty nice and it's good to have in your build. What this lets us do though is we can spin up to the very first pack, almost kill everything, and then switch to this from our weapon swap, and that would allow us to get even one kill with Rampage active, and then we weapon swap back, our kill counter stays active, and we can just go the rest of the map using our Paradoxicas. So having a Sinvicta's Metal in your weapon swap is really, really good, especially in builds like this where we can pretty easily kill stuff, even in tier 16s with a two-handed axe. Next up, I talked a little bit about the chest already. The next upgrade from this would probably be either a minus 15 mana cost Warlord chest. Yes, you can only get minus 15 mana cost now on Warlord's chests. They have to be at level 85. Other things I like is getting either Hunter or Elder crit. I think those are very good mods. And also maybe Crusader Explodey could be pretty nice for this league. I think those are all pretty good options. You don't necessarily need the minus 15 mana cost if you are going Cyclone, because our mana cost for the most part remains pretty low. But if you want to eventually switch out your character to doing Lacerate or any of the higher mana cost skills, it's going to be extremely important to have a minus 15 mana cost chest. Up next, so I think this is like super important here. Getting yourself a 6-link in any way, shape, or form. That is definitely super priority. So I'd say get yourself Terminus Est if you're doing my build. Get yourself a 6-link. And that's step 2. And then step 3 would be fixing your mana cost. So as you can see here, I have a ring that is crafted with Chainlink skills, have minus 3 total mana cost, life, tons of resistance, and I've crafted probably dozens and maybe even hundreds of these rings now for other people. This minus 3 cost is an Elrion exclusive mod, which means you have to kill Elrion, he has to drop jewelry, and he has to drop jewelry that has a prefix veiled on it, and that veiled prefix has to be his particular mod for you to be able to unlock this. And it has 3 tiers, 3, 2, and 1 total mana cost removed, and this craft thankfully only costs 4 chaos at the bench, and so I have that on my ring and also my necklace in order to reduce my mana cost. And I also allocate Anointing Lucidity, which is all the way up here on the tree. This gives us another minus 3 mana cost. And this is not like the best damage point here, but having the ability to just spin in place and not have to spend any mana, and having my unreserved mana equal to like basically my other skills that I want to use is extremely nice. Next up, gloves. These are just something we kind of found along the way as we were leveling, but these have life, a little bit of res, and the ability to do attack speed on them. Perfect gloves would probably have like Warlord mod on there with like physical damage and life and flat fizz and probably some resistance, some attack speed, but you don't really need all that much to get going. Next up, for boots, I pretty much just prioritize having 30% movement speed, some life, and a bunch of resist in this particular case. We're actually kind of fixing my resistances with these boots. But if you're cycling on like 15 or 20% movement speed boots, it's probably not going to feel as smooth or as good as 30% plus. Getting tailwind on your boots is a really nice benefit, or even getting elusive or getting both of those together with Awakener Orb. I'd say those are definitely things to look out for at like kind of more of a high budget thing. Next up, Ristlatha's Coil. This belt is absolutely ridiculous. It gives you more of your maximum physical attack damage and less of your minimum physical attack damage. Now that might seem like very confusing. How does this work? And doesn't that barely give me any more damage? Well, you're getting 45% more of the bigger number, and you're taking 36% away of the smaller number. And so combined, you get a lot more damage. It's just how like the math kind of works out. And this belt in particular, I believe, gave me like 20 to 22% more damage than my Stygian Vice with a jewel did before. And so that's pretty nice. You also notice this has quality on here, the attack modifiers quality, which increases both of those numbers, and also increases the flat fizz on this. And so this is overall a really, really nice belt. I got really lucky on my rolls. I have 30 and 38, and then a 99 life roll. Pretty nice. Not going to mess around with this. The only thing that would make this better at all would probably be corrupting it or double corrupting it for some better implicits. Next up, we talked a little bit about the hat. This is just something I kind of manually crafted. Having the more intelligence is nice. Having +1 minion for my Herald of Purity is pretty good. And having a little bit of resistances and life. And I crafted on that fizz taken from hits as extra fire damage. That just takes some physical damage and shoves it through our elemental resistances. And that kind of reduces your physical damage you take, which is nice. Necklace, this is something that I bought. I put Aspect of the Spider on there myself. So basically, once you get around to getting yourself a Herald of Purity ring, you're going to switch from using Pride to using Herald of Purity, but then that's going to leave you with a decent chunk of mana unreserved, and so that's where Aspect of the Spider comes in. Now, Aspect of the Spider, if you're not familiar with that, basically what it does is, while active, periodically applies a spider web debuff to nearby enemies, and this is almost like the entire screen, and this hinders them. And each web on the enemy increases the damage they take. And so each web makes it so they take 5% increased damage, which is effectively a more multiplier, and it'll probably, like with all the other multipliers, not be 5%, because this adds together with other increased damage taken things that we already have. But overall, really, really good. It's nice to slow things. It's nice to just make them take more damage. And I don't really think that there's any better option for the 25% mana that you reserve here. Now, talking about Herald of Purity, basically Herald of Purity gives us a bunch of flat physical damage. I'm using Circle of Guilt. This dropped for me naturally. This is an insane ring. But these basically are synthesis rings, which come from the synthesis maps, which got added to the drop table of bosses with the Awakener bonus objective. Or just the Awakening level, sorry. And so these will just drop these types of maps. And they can drop any of these circles. They can drop a bunch of different items, but they always have 1 to 3 implicit mods. Like, you notice this is an iron ring, but it has percentage global fizz and mana gained on kill. And then depending on each ring type, it'll affect a different herald, and it'll have 2 buffs. And you see this has Herald of Purity, has increased buff effect, and increased physical damage while affected by Herald of Purity. These are the best 2 rolls, as these are the 2 rolls that are increasing the damage that we're doing, which, yeah, this is the best basically type of ring. So it was really nutty that I dropped this. But this is effectively taking that Herald of Purity that we have here, and it is doubling the effect of it, and then is giving me an additional 60% increased damage. All very, very nice. Now, speaking of the things we're putting in our hat, we have Precision level 5. I don't level this too much because it is only really there to give us critical strike chance. It does give us flat accuracy, which is nice, but worthy foe. Enemies that we have taunted can't evade attacks, so we don't really need accuracy in order to hit. And we also have Dread Banner. Dread Banner is giving us 20% chance to impale and gives us a little bit of impale effect. I never drop this under almost any circumstance. So yeah, don't even worry about having it on your main bar. I just have mine on my control bar here at the bottom. And then I had an Enlighten in here, but I kind of stole it for my next build. In my weapons here, I'm doing a Ancestral Protector Totem linked with Culling Strike. I like Ancestral Protector right now. It kind of gives me a little bit more attack speed, but War Chief works as well. Just kind of whatever you want to do with that. I don't really like Vol Ancestral War Chief because I want to put all of my Vol souls into Molten Shell as opposed to putting some of them into Ancestral War Chief. I put Blood Rage on my weapon. This way, if I am in trouble and I'm degenning for whatever reason, I can always weapon swap and my Blood Rage goes off immediately. And that's pretty much the only easy way to get your Blood Rage off of you. So always highly recommend having Blood Rage on your weapon and never having auras, because if I had Precision on my weapon, every time I would weapon swap to pop Adrenaline or pop Rampage, I would have to reapply my Precision. Now on my other weapon, we're using Molten Shell, Vol Molten Shell attached to increased duration. This is really nice for survivability. Without any flasks up, this is going to give me 1500 just life, which is okay amount. But if I have my Lion's Roar going, it's going to give me a 3000 damage shield. And then of course I get an additional 1000 armor if I've impaled something recently, so that shield can get pretty big. Vol Molten Shell is way bigger. I think it's 3 times bigger than that. So with Lion's Roar up, that would be at least a 9k shield. So if you're getting in trouble, that's a really great oh crap button to press. The other skill we have linked here is Abyssal Cry. This is not really necessary. This is something that I just kind of started using when I was doing 2 orb tier 16s early on in the league. Basically my gameplay would be Leap Slam, Abyssal Cry, and start spinning onto enemies, because as you Leap Slam onto enemies for the first time you hit them, they will 100% of the time be stunned, so that gives you the time to Abyssal Cry, which just makes them pop and explode. You don't have to do that. If that's way too many buttons for you, don't feel like you have to do that at all. You can find something else to kind of link in here, or something else to do, basically. For my Leap Slam setup, I have Leap Slam, Blood Magic. This is mandatory. You need to 100% have Leap Slam linked to Blood Magic, otherwise you'll run out of mana from Leap Slamming very easily. Faster attacks is really nice, and then Endurance Charge on melee. Stun is really great because, as I said before, Leap Slam when it hits a full HP enemy will 100% stun, and so this gives you a chance to earn Endurance Charges. So as you say, damaging hits always stun enemies that are on full life. My glove here, we're doing Flesh and Stone linked to Maim. Flesh and Stone while you're in Blood Stance, as you can kind of see this red circle around me, that will always maim enemies. Now, Maim makes enemies take increased damage. You can see here enemies maimed by the skill take 16% increased physical damage. Now, they changed Maim support to be able to support any skill that maims. And what this does is enemies maimed by supported skills take 14% increased physical damage. And so that 14 gets added to this 16, and that's going to be 30% increased. Now, if you have Maim in your Cyclone or something, that 14% will not be affected at all. It'll only be the 16% from your Flesh and Stone because it's the higher number. This is the only way to take that 16% up to 30%. Last but not least, in my glove here, I also have cast when damage taken, Assassin's Mark. Assassin's Mark provides us a little bit more critical strike chance, a little bit more critical strike damage, and also gives us power charges and a little bit of life and mana on kill. This is only really useful against non-boss enemies because, as I've explained before, you lose 66% of your curses against real bosses like Cirrus and things of that nature. And yeah, it's most of the curse, so that doesn't really help all that much. You could switch this out to be enfeeble if you're having a lot of problems and things are killing you from afar with a bunch of hits. I like Assassin's Mark for now. For my flasks, Diamond Flask is 100% mandatory. You must have it. I have curse removal on mine. I say Lion's Roar is about not 100% mandatory. Getting a perfect one is definitely worth it. This is just 25% more melee physical damage. Period. Just 25% more multiplier in a flask. That is very significant. Very hard compared, very much big compared to other builds. My Quicksilver Flask is a Sturgeon's Quicksilver of Adrenaline. Maybe a perfect one here would be like an Alchemist Quicksilver of Adrenaline. Those can be kind of hard to hit. I also like being able to refill on bosses to be able to move fast and stuff. Last but not least, Surgeon's Sulfur Flask of Heat. This keeps me from getting frozen. I'm also able to refill all the time on bosses. Consecrated Ground. Like, a lot of people see this and like, oh, it's just 40% increased damage. What's the point? But Consecrated Ground, which is kind of like this holy ground that you see that I've like left behind on the ground. What that does is it makes it so that enemies take 100% increased critical strike chance. So that's just free crit, and might as well use that, right? I would probably look to maybe replace this with a Bottled Faith if I wanted to invest more money into the build. Last but not least, the Life Flask Scathing Divine Life Flask of Staunching. This will heal you up and remove your bleeding. I always like having my anti-bleed on my Life Flask because when you're bleeding, you hit your Life Flask, and so it removes the bleed as well. I am using for Pantheons currently Soul of Solaris. I should probably go capture the Gorgon to fill this out. And Soul of Rislatha. That's mostly because I do a lot of bossing. I think there's other things that could potentially be good, like being immune to poison for mapping. Everybody has like their own favorite little things there. In terms of bandits, I killed all the bandits, and that's because I wanted to put as many points into cluster jewels as possible. And yeah, I think that explains most of everything. I pretty much held on to my Terminus Est until I had basically dropped a Circle of Guilt, and I could replace with 2 Paradoxicas right away. But I was doing endgame content just fine with Terminus Est, and kind of show you the gear here a little bit. So I was using this Terminus Est for a long time. Oh, another thing that I kind of forgot about is that for leveling, Praxis is amazing. It gives you -8 to total mana costs. I actually used this like all the way to tier 16s until Elrion finally gave up and gave me the minus mana cost craft. Other good things like Bisco's Leash is kind of nice if you don't like doing the weapon swap. This can be pretty decent for just playing the game and leveling. And there's definitely some other cluster jewels I've looked at. For example, Hexbreaker makes you immune to curses while channeling. The main reason I'm not using this anymore is because there's lots of times you're leap slamming, like you're cycloning around and you leap slam. And as you're leap slamming, if your only curse removal is channeling from Hexbreaker, you'll be like temp changed or lose all your resistances as you're leaping through the air. And so you're suddenly extremely vulnerable and you aren't attacking. So it feels really bad. Another little trick, if you don't want to do the Rislathas, is getting a shield like this. It has +2 minimum power charges, and so if you weapon swap to that, you have 2 power charges, and so you can just weapon swap back and forth. I believe this shield cost me like 2 chaos or something like that on the first day of the league, so you'll probably be able to find something like that pretty easily. It's kind of nice for bossing if you want a little bit more of a push over the top, especially if you're planning to prop adrenaline anyways. I'm pretty sure we covered everything. Alright, so one thing I kind of did forget to talk about was my Cyclone main links. So for Cyclone, right now I'm using Cyclone. Impale is pretty much mandatory. Brutality is also incredibly nice. This makes it so you do no chaos, no elemental damage, but a lot of physical damage. You can replace this with an awakened brutality support. Next up, Fortify is mandatory as well. This makes it so you will have Fortify when you're hitting things. Makes it so that you do more damage. Really good as well. And then Infused Channeling, this, as we talked about before, gives you more damage. It's going to give us more movement speed because of our jewel sockets. It's also going to make it so that we're taking 8% less physical damage. All very, very nice. Now, the last one is a little bit weird. We're using Close Combat right now. Now, Close Combat does full damage within kind of a short range around you. So things that are very close to you, you're doing full damage. And the reason I'm using this is because of Combat Rush. So when you hit things with a skill that is supported by Close Combat, you gain Combat Rush. It doesn't actually show you what Combat Rush does here, but Combat Rush pretty much makes it so that for the next 2 seconds, you get 24% more attack and cast speed with that skill, as long as it's not supported by Close Combat. And what this does is it makes our Leap Slam feel incredibly snappy, which is extremely nice on some of the parts of the game where you really want to Leap Slam really fast. So for example, you can see here, I get this little running man combat rush thing. This makes my Leap Slam feel a little bit faster as I'm going through the map. And when you get like slowed by the delirium, I find that that's very much impactful. If you have any questions, I'm trying to stream almost every day over at twitch.tv/DonTheCrown. So come on by, ask some questions, hop in our Discord community. There's lots of people that are playing this build right now, and we'll be able to answer some of your questions. So thank you much, guys. Hope you have a great one. See you again next time.